Okay. Huh?
You taking a picture of that?
Well, I was gonna catch a video of the whole thing,
Oh.
if you don't mind.
This is my perch. This is the main shaft for the Empire Mine. This track right here goes down 4,600 feet. Not quite a mile. You get off, walk over a half mile, and you have another 4,000 foot underground hoist. And it goes down, as I say, 4,000 feet. By the time you get all the way to the bottom of this mine, you go on 11,007 feet, which is just a little over 2 miles. That you end up just short of a mile below the surface. And that's about a half mile below sea level. This track here is 32 degrees from the horizon, but it doesn't stay that way. It goes just beyond that cart. It levels off a little bit, and then it gets steeper. It gets to 55 degrees because you're following the white quartz vein. That's where your gold is. So it goes about just approximately twice as steep as this. Now the miners in the early days, they worked a 10-hour shift, 6 days a week, and they got paid. The miners got paid $3 a day. The muckers got paid $2.50 a day. The hoist man, who had a lot of responsibility, he got $4 a day.
Was that a lot of money back then?
Well, it wasn't a lot of money, but back then
it was a good living.
It was a little bit more than the average working person got, because mining has always been a dangerous and hard job. This actually was a very fairly safe mine. 26 deaths over 106 years.
That's pretty good.
And that was pretty good, especially in those era when they didn't have safety measures and et cetera. And but the biggest problem was by far was the dust, the rock dust, silicosis of the lungs.
Wow.
And my father used to say, tell me a 50-year-old miner was an old miner, and very few have made it past 60. Because the dust from a quartz is very sharp, and got into your lungs.
Basically glass, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a form of glass, I guess you could say, but it ground up. Some of the mine operators, when they started using drills, didn't quite understand that at first, because if you were mining something like, say, limestone, they didn't seem to have that much of a problem. But as soon as they started mining in here, they started coughing and having problems that way. So what they did is they put a hole up the length of the drill, and they pumped water in as they drilled. Now that did several things. It washed the sand out. It cooled the drill and lubricated the drill. And so most of the drills you see have that hole, about a 1/4 inch hole up the length of the drill.
Were there any animals, donkeys used in?
Yes, mules were taken down. Early days on the drifts. See, the way a mine is, the main shaft is like your high-rise building's main elevator, and then you work out down in high-rise. You go down the hall. Well, in a mine, you go down the drifts. Okay. Now the drifts were always built with a slight incline going up, and two reasons for that. One is when you're coming back down with the rock in your ore cart, you were pushing it, you were going downhill. The second reason was drainage. And so originally the muckers had to push their cart to the shaft. They could only push one cart. That's about a ton of rock. Then they got the mules to pull the carts, and they could get 7 carts behind a mule.
Wow.
And there's a lot of stories about the mules, but the only way to get the mules down is to tie them up on that man skip. And they had to tie them up very securely, because of course the mule was going to panic.
Of course.
And such. And so they couldn't bring them up every day. So the only time they ever brought them up was when they had a disease that they couldn't treat down there, or retirement. Now they would bring a veterinarian down to the mules. They tried to treat their mules very kindly. The mule worked one shift a day, and he had his own stall. The feed was brought down to him. The veterinarian was brought down to him. The manure was brought out so that they didn't form methane gas down there. So there's a lot of stories about the mules. They'd bring them apples and treats and so forth. And some of the mules got a hankering for chewing tobacco. But
I read that they knew how much weight they were pulling, and they knew
oh
if
yeah,
they pulled
they could
the weight,
count cars.
They'd get
or
rewarded.
some of them could.
They'd get rewarded with their tobacco if they pulled the right amount. So
Yeah.
they wouldn't pull it.
But
unless it
but
was-
if you hooked too many cars behind them, they wouldn't go.
I also read something about rats down there that they kind of used rat. They didn't mind the rats down there so much because they were a good gauge for methane gas and poisonous gases. If you saw dead rats.
I don't know if that was so much true in this mine as it was in some mines. Now over in Cornwall, that was very true.
Okay.
Very true. The mines in Cornwall were horrible sanitary conditions.
And were those gold mines also?
No, those were tin and lead mines.
Okay.
But they were the expert hard rock miners in those days. They had been doing that for centuries. In fact, they had actually mined out underneath the ocean
Oh, wow.
in the early days. But they're the ones that had the Cornish steam engine pump. But of course, the steam engine had to be on the surface. We couldn't have all that steam down there. And the way they transferred the thing is they had a teeter powder beam. The steam engine was making the teeter powder rock back and forth. The other end was connected to a beam hanging on rollers that might go down a half mile to a mile down into the a mine and going back and forth. And the pump at the bottom was just like your bicycle pump.
Wow.
And the only operating one that we know of in the world is right across the freeway in the North Star Powerhouse Museum, just on the other side of the freeway, just right down Empire Street here. The two pipes behind me, as I say, pumping water out was a big problem. And of course, the steam engines were the only engines they had, in the early days, besides animal power. And then they converted to water power, the Pelton water wheels, and because they had chopped all the forest down around here.
Right.
And then about the turn of the century, they started going to electric.
Are these originally there was metal?
This steel right here was purchased as scrap iron after the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. This was tracked. It was the streetcar tracks. There used to be 4 traction companies down Market Street. They tore them all up, made a muni system, and so he bought this as scrap iron and put it in this topsoil zone. Once you got down into the hard rock, you didn't have to do all the shoring. But this actually leaks. You can see the mud on the steel and such. It leaks.
When did operations in this mine stop?
They stopped in 1956.
That was
after
a long
106 years of thing. But the reason they stopped was going back to the 1920s. Price of gold was fixed at $20.67. There was only about 500 miners here. In 1933, President Roosevelt, trying to stabilize the financial world, set the price at $35 an ounce. That was the heyday of the mining. There was no depression in Grass Valley. They went from 500 miners to 2,700 miners.
Wow.
They had a housing shortage here. And that was the peak employment here. This mine, for a very short time, had 830 people working here. But war shut them down during World War II. After World War II, inflation has soared, and they couldn't pay the miners enough. The miners went on strike. They wanted more, justifiably so. They should have got more pay, but the mine owners couldn't raise it because their product was fixed.
Yeah.
And they didn't change it until 1972, I think it was, when President Nixon finally released it. Now it's what, $1,250.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little over 2,000, I think.
Well, is there still gold in this mine?
They tell me 80% of the gold's still there. Now, how they
Isn't
come up
that-
with that figure is
Wow.
beyond me. But
Wow.
there is gold. They didn't stop because they ran out of gold.
No.
There is one mine that's trying to open up the Idaho, Maryland, about a mile north of here. But nowadays you got to do all this environmental stuff and
Oh, gosh, yeah.
convince the city that it's a good idea.
I don't know how they can afford to mine now.
And-
Yeah.
I think I read it. It's something like that. It had to be over $1,000 an ounce for it to be cost effective from open tobacco.
Well,
What I read. I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, it's,
Especially
last time I knew it was
California.
about 1,250, plus or minus a little bit,
Wow.
because it varies every day, but that's.
1,249.
Really?
The price of gold now.
So at night, do you go down there and try and retirement?
Can you swim real good?
How far
There's a
down
water
the
level down there, is
Water
what you're
level
saying.
just below that cart.
Oh, okay. Is
Oh,
that
no
the
kidding.
truth?
But we have a new edit there on the fourth light on the right. We're going to be bringing people in, and
Ooh, when's that starting?
about 2 years from now. We have the adit built, but we have to get all the
Licenses and
train
everything.
and displays. And,
I had heard you were going to do something like that. That's
yeah.
cool.
Well, it got delayed.
Yeah, I was going to
a
be
lawsuit.
before now.
Oh yeah, it's been in the works for quite a number of years.
Yes, it has. Right.
But the state got sued for toxic materials on the park in general.
Oh.
And so we had to go in and cap all these old pitting
Cyanide mercury.
piles
Yeah.
and
Shocker.
test all the hiking trails, and
Oh, sure.
cap some of them where they found a little bit of toxic materials and so forth.